Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how I made this Blade Runner animation entirely in Blender, from reference gathering to modeling, from scattering my assets using Geoscatter, using Envigen to create my smoke simulations, and also using Blender's built-in tools to create realistic rain. From there we'll jump into how I managed to render this 56-minute per frame animation using GarageFarm and how you can too. And then we'll jump into our post-production in Nuke and color correcting in DaVinci Resolve. So grab a snack and watch me blabber on about 3D for quite some time. So let's get into it. Alright, so to start with, I needed some inspiration to essentially make this animation. And I came across this video by Stefan Hampel. I hope you say it like that. And he did a Blade Runner animation already, quite sort of different to how I've done it, but I did like the way he animated his car. So I basically went with his movement essentially, but the actual story and the environment I wanted to be a little bit different. But yeah, if you want to check out Stefan Hampel, his channel's here. I think he works at ILM, so he definitely knows his stuff. He does use 3ds Max, I think, for his animations. Yeah, 3ds Max V-Ray. But yeah, he does some really cool stuff, so definitely check him out. So from there, I basically went into reference mode and finding what I wanted to achieve. So I got the film stills up, basically the most cinematic stills from the movie, and I was just trying to work out which one I wanted to do essentially. And I was really big on this nighttime one, and I was really big on this outside one. And as we all know, volumetrics in Blender aren't fun to deal with. They require so much rendering time compared to other render engines. And I just thought this might have been a little bit too much work. I mean, in the end, I ended up using so many volumetrics, it probably didn't even matter. But maybe I will do this one eventually. But from there, I basically decided that this scene where you can see the yellow house was going to be basically my scene for the animation. So I got really high res samples of everything to do with that scene, including the rocks, the building, the sort of assets that were scattered. I really wanted to get this tree in there just for the story purpose, but it didn't work with my framing, because if the car was coming from the top right and then the tree was already there, it would have just looked a bit odd. So I just ended up removing the tree, and we got what we got. So then I needed to either make this model or find one online. And I must admit, I made everything in the scene apart from this vehicle. Now for this vehicle, I found a guy online called Hitoshi, and this is his art station, Hitoshi Mikami. Very talented art director. But I came across this model and I was like, this is one of the best Blade Runner models I've seen compared to what you can get out there. So I asked him if I could use it, and I reference him in everything that I do where I post it. And he was like, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to do that. So he ended up giving me this model, and then I ended up unwrapping it and texturing, which you'll see in the next part. Just a sort of tip for people, if you are going to create something quite sort of to a serious level, maybe reaching out to people who are hard surface modelers or vice versa to sort of collaborate on a big project could be quite cool. I mean, in the industry, not everyone works on everything. Some people very specialized in hard surface or texturing or rigging, and obviously nobody is going to be amazing at everything. So bringing other people together, especially when you are true to your word and you say you're going to reference them and give them credit, I think is quite a good thing to do in the industry. And yeah, this saved me loads of time. I mean, this would have took me hours to model, and then it would have took me ages to get to the stage where I was building the set and stuff like that. So this was a really cool sort of situation that happened. So from there, I essentially started texturing this vehicle, and I was using my PureRef pure references here to basically go off how I was going to texture everything. So I think the next step is that we jump into the Blender file and I'll show you around the model, and then I can show you in Substance Painter how I actually textured all this. Alright, so now we're in the Blender file and you can see we've got a lovely Blade Runner spinner, I think it's called. It's Case Spinner in the movie, but yeah, we've got it in the file and it is rigged, so I can control basically every part of the animation that I would want to. So for example, I can go into pose mode, I can bring up these arms. That doesn't actually work, it's because it's attached to this one, and you can see that it's actually making the pistons move up and down. And I knew that that was going to be a key part of the animation, so I really wanted to make sure that I had really good control of everything to do with that wheel. And then obviously from there I had this sort of pivot that I could do, as well as this one just to like move that suspension around. And then I had just like that overall control point. I did have some other suspensions that I could have used. Again, it's using the pistons, and then this as well. One thing that I didn't do with this rig is actually allow it to turn. Obviously this back wheel would be the one that is turning the wheel, well, turning the vehicle, but I just thought I'm not going to be turning this. I don't need to rig it to turn. So I just avoided that. But yeah, so all the metal is done in Substance Painter, which we'll jump in a minute. But the other things that I needed to do were obviously all the lights and all these headlights as well. Now, I do actually think I've changed some of these in the actual final scene. But for now, this was like my starting point for everything. So I did actually end up tweaking this, like the backlight glass in the final scene. So it is a little bit different to this. But what you're probably noticing is that it's orange here, but it's red at the top. And that's due to basically pure reference. So if I go into my reference here, you can see that it's really orange and red. And obviously you can see here where the glass actually looks a lot different to how it is in my 3D file, and that's why I ended up changing it, because I realized mine looked nothing like it. But I really wanted to get that orange, like full glow, and then it reflect red on the vehicle. And I probably could have done it quite simple, but the way I went about it was to, well, I'll actually show you. I went into my emission light, and I got a red and orange light, and I separated it via the reflection ray. And what that does is basically control the light that is hitting the reflection, I think. So I could do like a different color like at the bottom here, but it still reflects red, which is really cool. So I guess that helps you, I think it's mainly to do with halogen lamps, where they'll look a certain color, but the glow and the light emitting off it could be quite different. Well, I just thought that was a really cool sort of trick to fake that sort of effect. And then with these lights, this is just a simple glass shader with the bump, and then I've just stuck the rough shape of the headlight of the spinner. I couldn't really tell what the light looked like. But obviously you don't see the front of the car, which is a shame, because I think it would have looked quite good. But yeah, so the actual like texturing of the car is super simple for the lights. And obviously we're back here, so you don't need that much detail. Now I did actually like export 8K maps, but these are all converted to more optimized meshes, well, UV maps. But essentially to unwrap this, I set materials for different parts of the car, and then I make groups in an add-on called UV Packmaster. So let me just explain this. So I have a back material here, and if I go to select linked material and I isolate this, we can see all the back part which is on this specific material. Now if I go into edit mode and select everything, you'll see that everything is encased in one UV square. Now, obviously this would be over here, but if I open everything, you'll see why it's over there. So if I select everything like so, and then go into edit mode, you'll see how I have loads of different UV maps, right? Now, each of these UV maps is going to be one texture set. So a texture set will consist of the base color, the roughness, and the normal. Maybe metallic sometimes, but I didn't actually use metallic on this. I just used the default slider to get the effect that I wanted. So I basically, yeah, I separate everything by material so that it's just really simple for when I want to apply maps. And you can see, I think I had like 4 or 5 different maps just for this vehicle. So obviously the wheel was like an individual one because maybe I'd do a close-up. This part was one, the back was one, the middle was one, and then the front was one. And that's just to get a really high quality texture detail. I know some of the Transformer films have like thousands of UV maps, so having like 5 or 6 is not a big deal. But obviously we only have a certain amount of VRAM, and if you're rendering in GPU, you've got to be wary of that. Obviously on CPU you have much more sort of leeway, but in GPU we got to be mindful of that. Now, once you've got your add-on unwrapped, the way that you basically pack it into those little squares that I'm talking about is by using an add-on. Well, I used an add-on for it anyway. So I can go into, well, I'll first select everything, and because I've selected different parts of it to use different materials, I can now use UV Packmaster to pack into specific squares based on material. So if I come over here, you'll see here I have UV Packmaster, right? And if I go into groups, we can select a grouping method that we want to use. So because I've grouped all my textures by material, I can click material and I can, well, first I need to go into edit mode. I can now apply grouping scheme, right? And this will group everything into like specific colors. From there, you can then pack. So you go to P and then you go to group to tiles, and then you can pack groups to tiles, and it will pack everything based on texture. So like this is mechanical box, this is the middle, this is the back box, this is the front box. Now obviously my textures might be messed up now. They actually don't look messed up, but that is the way that I end up doing it. And UV Packmaster is like really good when you want like really tight spacing, or maybe you want everything to be on like the same sort of like density. You can change pretty much everything that you want to. And it just gives so much control when you're packing things. Obviously, it doesn't help you unwrap stuff any easier. I mean, this object here was a bit of a pain to unwrap, to be honest, because it's all one object. And here you can see how it is unwrapped. But yeah, it's a really cool add-on. Obviously, you could do it yourself, but for something that makes life so quick, it is worth it, I think. But yeah, let's jump into Substance Painter and get started. Here in Substance, you can see my materials. And this is basically just copy and pasted on everything. It was super simple to do. And I didn't really take that much like time and effort into it. So if I just turn this all off. So we're on the back piece right now. So let's actually turn everything else off. Again, this is a super simple material. So I'll probably start off with a metal, like grey material with a little bit of speckle, a little bit of roughness, like difference in it. From there, I'll add some like scratches. And this is all again looking at the reference that we had. So if I bring up the reference, it's really like scuffed up, gunmetal-y, with loads of scratches and marks. And I mean, if you look here on the reference, it's messed up. And here, so I was just trying to make this as basically rusty and old looking as possible, like weathered, essentially. Weathered's a good word. So then just adding onto that, just adding like loads of grunge, like so. And then I used the Matte Effects Rust Weathering, which is like a smart material. Actually, I think it's a generator. Yeah, generator. So if you come down to the top left, I think my head is in the way. Let me just move this over. If you go to generator here, you'll be able to see it at the bottom, and it's called Matte Effects Weathering. So if you just add that, it just adds some rust, and you can change how rusty it's going to be. So for example, if I dial in this part, we can get it looking super rusty, as if it's been in a scrapyard. But I just wanted a little bit. Obviously it goes through rain a lot, so you'd probably get a little bit of rust here and there. From there I also added like some water drips, which you can't really see, but it just adds a little bit of like that wetness to it. And then I think I just did a little bit of like dirt again. Yeah, so going back to that reference, you saw it had like loads of white sort of splodges on it. So I really wanted to try and match that reference as much as possible. And then a final like grey material. And then I just copied that pretty much on everything. The red I actually did in Blender. So I overlaid loads of grunt textures in Blender. I just thought it would be easier. The wheel, let's have a look at the wheel. I think this is just like a standard like tire. Yeah, rubber base. And then I just overlaid loads of dirt. So I did a wear layer just to add sort of that rubber groove. I did some dirt, and then I just started going to town on like the dirt that was in the crevices and stuff. But super simple. So the final Blade Runner like spinner looked like this. As you can see, it's got a really nice gunmetal to it. The lights look really good. But yeah, I did change some of the lights, but I was pretty happy with how this result turned out. And yeah, it fit really well in the scene in the end. I was really happy with it. So shout out to Hitoshi again. So from there, my hero asset was pretty much done. It was just the set building. And the set building probably took the longest amount of time because I couldn't really find anything that was of use. And I really wanted it to mimic the Blade Runner sort of world, so I ended up just creating everything from scratch and then texture painting everything in Substance Painter. So let's dive into how I modeled and textured the set, and especially matching it to real world and like reference from the movie. That was sort of quite tricky, so let's dive into that. All right, so now we're here in our Blender file. And you can see we've got quite a bit going on in the collections folder, but I've just turned everything off just so it's a bit simple. And I'm sorry if I don't cover everything, but feel free to ask questions in the comments and I will gladly ask. Again, this is just an overview of everything that I do, just to give you an idea of sort of how you could go about doing something yourself. So with this building, I obviously knew that my camera angle was going to be here. I got the camera angle and animation sort of in place before I started doing everything else, because I wanted to know where the camera was going to be, what I needed to model, what I needed to texture, how detailed stuff needed to be. And that was sort of the best way for me to work anyway. So that was just like, I added a plane, I added the camera movement and the car, essentially. I did sort of block out, but not really. I just kind of did final animation straight away, which could be a good idea, could be a bad idea. Depends who you ask, I guess. But I obviously knew that I'm going to be viewing this building from sort of this angle. And going back to my reference, so if I jump back into my pure ref, I knew that it needed to look like this. So if I just make my pure ref this big. So here you can start to see how I tried to achieve the exact same sort of look, but sort of went a little bit different just for artistic purposes. So this yellow building was very key for the actual shot, and I think any person who's interested in Blade Runner 49 will know like this box very well. Now obviously it's a little bit different. It doesn't have these grooves, and I feel like probably this point could be a little bit pointier, but I tried to get it looking as accurate as possible. And then obviously I textured it as accurate as possible. Now obviously my shot is raining, so I needed the building to be wet, so that's why mine's a little bit shiny. So let's just take a closer look. I mean, this is the building. I've got simplify on at the moment, so if you go to the render tab, you can go down to simplify and limit how big your textures are. Now I think this is an 8K image on here, but just for viewport performance I just set it to super low, but you can get an idea, and you can also see the final render of how everything looked. Obviously some of the things didn't need to be that detailed. If the camera's here, like this keypad does not have to be the greatest thing in the world, so that's why it really isn't that detailed. And if I go into the mesh, you can see it's not detailed at all, but from camera view it works. So I think once you know your camera angle and you know your animation, that really allows you to sort of be very performance based in how you model and how you texture. I think that was a good thing for this animation. And I've never done like a really big animation like this. Obviously I've done a car animation, which was actually featured on the Blender showreel. Here's a little clip. But other than that, this was my first time. So anyway, how I went about modeling this was I added in a human about 5'6" or something, and I had a picture of Ryan Gosling like this. So I basically made this building and made sure that my human matched where Ryan's head was, and that's how I could tell the scale, and that's how I did everything. So going off this yellow building, I was able to then determine how big this side was and how big this side was. Now obviously maybe this could have been a little bit further left, maybe this could have been a little bit further right, but I think in general it all looks pretty accurate to this. And then from there I needed to model this building, which was super simple. I did end up using a displace modifier on it as well, so it's super high detailed, and then I used a displace modifier on it so that I could get like really nice sort of warping effect of the concrete, as if it's like, I don't know, just not perfect essentially. And then I textured all the detail in. I mean, let's turn simplify off just so we can have a look at all these textures in their full glory. So now we can see like how textured everything is from camera view, and you can see the texturing that I've done to make this part of the wall look very accurate to this part of the wall. And yeah, it was just a case of, does it look right compared to that part, and just getting a sense of scale for everything. So everything is super simple modeling. Nothing really was difficult, if I'm honest. I think the only thing that was time consuming is these cables. So I did that with a curve modifier. So I went Bezier curve, and if I go over to that, you can then change the extrusion of it. Sorry, not the extrusion, the depth, and then you can create a cable. And I just went in and hand placed each of these cables, and something that I did to make it look a little bit more real was to, let me just grab that point, is to have them squeeze between these bars. Now the reference doesn't have that, I don't think. I can't see it like squeezing them in, but I wanted it to be like very believable that something was pushing these cables in and keeping them all nice and tidy essentially, which is why I've got them all coming in, and then I've got some dangling coming in and then dangling again as if like they've got loose over time. And then the next step was to get like these copper things where I placed them, and then I did the texturing on the building to then make it look like stuff is leaking out of them, which really helped the realism. And I also did that with like this ladder, so it's like the rain is washing the rust onto the wall, which is pretty cool. And then the final sort of texture on this wall was like making it look damp, as if like the floor is so wet it's like absorbing the moisture and making the building super damp, which is on the reference. So honestly, it was just about really analyzing your reference and making it look as good as possible. I'm just going to turn simplify back on. I'll go like 1000. Now, the only things that I didn't fully copy for this building was these panels that I've added, and also this top part. I didn't see any reason in modeling something so complex. So these two assets are actually from Kitbash, and that was just really useful just to have something and place it. For this light, actually, I knew I wanted this to sort of be a key point. So I actually ended up like Googling how do these lights work, and I actually thought it was like a spinning light. But when I came to look at it, it's essentially like a blocker and a mirror. So this is actually a mirror, and then it's projecting the light forward, and then it's blocking it when it spins around it. So the more you know, I guess, but that is how sort of these lights work. And this was a massive point in the animation. I think it sold the believability of it quite a lot. But yeah. And I just love how it lights up these metal parts of the railing. I think that's super cool. Now, for this cloth simulation, I actually did this on a live stream. I've been live streaming pretty much every Sunday for the last few weeks anyway. I did this live stream quite a while ago. But yeah, I did this on a live stream, and it took me a little bit of time. But essentially, it's just obviously a plane, and then I place it on top of my rail that I made. And I know this one doesn't have it, but I wanted some like movement just to make the shot a little bit more believable, because obviously we've got the car, we've got frame, we've got a building, but I wanted other elements which were making the scene look alive. And one way I thought of doing that was just adding like a tarp over this roof and making it look ripped like so, because you can actually see through this. But it's not modeled like that. I've just textured it, and the way I've textured that in Substance is basically getting like a rip tear brush and then painting in the alpha, so then it becomes see-through, and then it just makes it look a little bit more ruined. But yeah, basically how I did this was I went into weight paint and I pinned all the parts that I wanted to be stiff and then just simulated it. I can have a look at the settings that I actually used, because I can't remember. I'm not actually sure. I mean, here are the settings if you want to do something similar. I'll just scroll down. And here you can see my pin group. So that is what is keeping this simulation upright. And then from camera, it really works. And then to actually get it moving, I just used a wind like force field. So if you go Shift A, force field, wind, I just animated the wind like rotating on the Z axis, and then changed the power with a noise modifier in the graph editor. And then that's what gave it that sort of like gusty sort of effect. But yeah, I think that really helped sell the realism. And then I also did that on the front model. So if I just exit out of this view and I bring in my white building, and the reason I did all these collections was because I ended up rendering in like 6 different passes, which you probably saw on the render breakdown at the start. And that was just because I wanted to render this super high quality. So I needed to separate everything out so that it wasn't affected by VRAM limits, and it just ran a little bit more smoothly. And then also, if I wanted to change a specific part of the render and not have to render everything out again, I could. So for example, I rendered the spinner on its own pass, which meant if I wanted to change anything about the spinner, I could just change it and then just render that individual element and then post it back on in Nuke. And you'll see how I put everything together in Nuke. It's pretty easy though. You just select holdout and you'll pretty much be dandy to go. So anyway, here is my other model, and this is supposed to be this. Now, obviously, I know that I'm not going to be seeing any of this. I know I'm not going to be seeing any of this. So what's the point in modeling something and texturing something to such a high degree if I'm only doing one shot of it? So obviously you can tell it looks fine from here, but if you went around here, it doesn't look too great. But here is like the wind simulation that I was talking about. So this is the exact same, but for the pin group on this, I just did, if I go into weight paint, I just did these 4 corners, and I was really trying to figure out how I go about pinning this because it was looking a little bit strange, and I just thought this was the easiest and, like, I don't know, just the quickest way to do it essentially. I know obviously that this is very different, but the thing with this is that this sheet goes over the entire building, and I was just like, I'm not simulating. I can't be bothered. So maybe like you could do it a simpler way. I did try to get like the folds, but I think you just needed so much fabric to get that effect. I was just like, yeah, I'm not doing it. But I at least like did it a fair go. And then obviously with these curves, I did the same thing as my wires. I just did a Bezier curve and then made it into a pipe, and then I extruded it around this pipe, and then I also like gave it some bend and like wobble so that it wasn't like just straight, and then I also connected everything by hand, one by one, and you can see like they all connect. I really wanted everything to be spot on, so yeah. And then for some of these things, these are all from Megascans, I believe. Yeah, so all of these 4 are Megascans. And then I did do a wind simulation for this cloth sim actually. So here you can see it. And these auto keyframes is essentially me. I'll show you. If you imagine this cube is the force field, I essentially press auto key, go to the start, and then I just rotate it like this, and then change the axis. And the reason I did that is because wind isn't perfect, especially in a storm. So I just wanted some random like movement. I didn't just want like, I don't know, like a fake noise where it's just like strong, not strong, strong. So I just thought, let's just get my mouse and just wiggle it about. And that's what I did. And it seemed to do a really good job in like getting that fake wind. I mean, if we go into the animated view, you can see it's very different in how it looks. And I really like that final like big fold that we get just before we go past the camera. I think that was pretty cool. Yeah. Now, these elements were pretty simple. I actually forgot to render this tractor in the final thing. It must have camera turned off or something, because I looked in my renderer and I was like, wait, I didn't actually include the tractor. But the tractor is actually from Sketchfab. I didn't model it. I just got a 3D scan of a tractor that was a similar shade to this vehicle, but it wasn't actually in the final shot, and to be honest, it didn't really help the shot in any way. So yeah, I didn't do that. But yeah, for these silos, very simple again. Just get the reference, model something similar, just so it looked, I don't know, like the movie. I think the big importance on this was getting the texture right, because it has some sort of like moss building up on the top, which was like really important to get just for the look of the animation. And same here. I couldn't actually tell what this box was, so I just ended up adding a box with like a circle on it, for whatever reason. And then the barrels I got from Megascans, and I just scattered them around. And just to make them look a little bit more different, I did a random value adjuster. So wherever, basically, if they're all joined by geometry, so they're all one object, if you separate the randomness per island and then crunch it so that you get really strong different values, you can then plug that as a factor into the hue saturation and then change the value, and that will make the result of that material differ between each object, which just makes it look a little bit more real. As well as that, just rotating it so that you can't see the same texture over again helps, and then rotating them on certain positions so it doesn't look like it's just been randomly copied. Well, so it does look like it's randomly copied. And that was pretty much it for like the intricate models. It's not really that like complex. It's just the same thing over and over again. Like get a cube, extrude it to this, get a cylinder, bump it up a bit, make it a little bit curved. It was more the texturing that really sold these objects, and then placing them in a part of the frame which looked familiar to the movie. The main, like, the biggest issue was getting these scatters done, because I didn't want to use a texture with like displacement, because in the movies, if they're doing a really detailed shot, they'd probably scatter everything. And obviously people scatter grass all the time, they scatter like different things, trees, but rocks is sort of like a different ball game, because you just have rocks on top of rocks and on top of rocks. So if I turn off all my buildings and I go into surface, you can see I have my surface here. And again, with this, I've modeled it based off reference. I did actually have a reference from the top, but I seem to have lost it. But I tried to do like the tire tracks which were there, and then try to make it a little bit bumpy, and then also try to add like a little walking path, which you can see here. So if I go into rendered view, you can see, well, you can't actually see it when I'm in rendered view, but there is like a walking path, and the geometry is still very nice. I didn't really want to use dynamic topology because maybe I wanted to texture this in substance, maybe not, I don't know, but I just thought it would be nice just to subdivide it and then sculpt it. But yeah, from there I needed to scatter hundreds if not thousands of objects, of rocks, and I obviously used geoscatter for that. Obviously you can see here I haven't organized very well, but you'll see that this just becomes a mess when I turn stuff on. So for example, first off, let's just look at these rocks, right? So I do actually have a close-up. So this is what we're dealing with. This is what we're trying to create, and it's just so rocky, and there's so many. So the way I went about it was just throw as much as you can onto it, essentially. So if I turn on the first one, this is the first pass of rocks, right? So the way I've distributed this is pretty much do it manually. So if I just turn it off, actually, we can see how I've sort of gone about this and my thinking behind it. So in Geoscatter, you can either draw stuff manually, you can get biomes, you can like use their presets, or you can create images yourself. Now I went like through the route of doing it via vertex paints or weight paints. I can't actually remember. Vertex paints. So if I go into vertex paint, you'll start to see that some parts are white, some parts are dark. And then if I go into weight paint, you'll start to see how I have like a bunch of like really harsh, and then it sort of fades off. Now to start off with, I used this as like a base mask for every single one of the rocks. This is where the pathways are, and this is where the big parts of the image texture are white. And the main reason for that is that my thinking is that when there's less rocks, you're going to see more of like the white, grey, brownish dirt, and where there's more rocks, it will probably be more black. So I basically tried to just work with the texture and also the geometry that I've modeled as well. So if I turn these back on, you can really see how many objects. I mean, there's 2 million objects just in this one scatter. So if I turn on the next one, there's 1.4 million. So in total, let me just turn everything on and tell you how many scatters are in the scene. All right, so I just counted everything, and there's 9.1 million rocks in this one scene, just in this one area. And that is ridiculous. Now, the biggest one is this soil one, and this soil was basically like little clumps of dirt, which I got from Megascans, and I just scattered that everywhere just to add a little bit of texture. Now, in retrospect, do I think this was necessary? Probably not. I could have just used a displacement texture, especially like with how dark the shot was. But with anything 3D, I think it's really good to test yourself and try to do things that you never thought you'd do, or try to compete with what they do in Hollywood movies. Because without trying to test yourself and failing, or blue screening your computer in quite a bit, you're not gonna grow. So challenging yourself by doing something so ridiculous is a good thing sometimes. But anyway, you can really see where my masks are sort of taking place. Some I've used inverted masks so that they do fill up some of the areas, some I didn't. So if I go through these, you will see sort of differences between the two. So this one is opposite to that second one, but it's like less density. I have this random one, which is a little bit more everywhere, but this is really focusing on not going where that white dirt is on the shot. The soil is pretty much everywhere, like I said. And then on these two red ones, these are like big rocks, because when I was looking at my shot, with all the tiny rocks, it just kind of looked flat, even though there was stuff there. So I ended up adding in some big rocks throughout the scene, and I think these really helped sell the realism. So we had some like really big ones, and then I added some like medium ones, and that just helped break up the texture of that scene. I probably can go into render. Yeah, so like this really helped sell that realism. Now, obviously there was a lot of scatters there, and I did scatter this all on this surface, but something that you can do with Geoscatter is turn on camera optimization, and that means anything from the camera renders, everything else doesn't, which really save me some time. And then also I changed the visibility of everything by displaying it as a placeholder. So when I do want to make sure that it's in the right place, I'm not seeing actual geometry, I'm just seeing a triangle. Now for the actual geometry, it was like 50 faces, if that, and the texture sizes, they didn't have any textures, it was just brown. And that was all for just making the scene as optimized as possible. Now, if you are wondering what the rocks look like when it's not dark and you can actually see everything, this is what the rocks look like. So I feel like if the shot was bright and you could see everything that was going on, I feel like this makes a really big difference, especially when the car lands, because I'm not sure if people saw, but when the car lands here, the lights is actually hitting all the different rocks, and you can really see like the layers of detail in the shot, which you wouldn't get with a displacement texture really, or if you did, it would just be repeating pretty much all the time. So I feel like what I did was really worth like the detail, but I probably could have done less and saved myself so much hassle when trying to render this, because although it wasn't going above the VRAM, because there was 10 million rocks and then everything else trying to render as well, it was pretty impossible. And even on like the viewport renders, it was so insane to just do that viewport render. So yeah, but I do think it looks really good, and I just think Blender needs to get better at handling higher object counts in the scenes, because if it could, it would be so good. But yeah, I mean, you can really see where that white dirt is coming through. I feel like it looks really cool, and it really makes a difference compared to someone who's just like mixing two materials together and calling it a day. This is sort of like the next level of environment building that you need for this kind of shot. All right, so jumping into the next thing then, we have, I mean, the background was pretty simple. Let me just find it behind. The background was pretty simple. It was just a mountain asset, which I have not textured, literally just black. And I did sort of texture it a little bit maybe, but not really. I modeled some of these pylons, and then I gave the top of them a red light, and that was just to add something to the scene, just in the fog. And actually, that's a good thing. You can also see that there's texture on this background, and that's because when you're looking past the rocks, you still need stuff like adding detail to the background, otherwise it just looked completely flat. So that's why I did that. But I mean, even with the fog and everything, it kind of just gets lost. But the fog is actually a good talking point next. So if I turn on the fog, you'll see everything gets nice and moody, and instantly you're looking at like an hour render time because fog is insane. But I've actually got 2 levels of fog on here. So I have the fog far, which is this one. So if I go into side view, you can sort of see what's happening. So where the mountains are, it's really foggy, and then it sort of blends its way back in. And the reason for that is because if you just have a fog box on the mountain, you'll probably be able to see where it ends. And if you're talking about real life, fog doesn't really just stop. It either like gets like really centered and like close and something, and then it fades out, or it's just in like one part as like a cloud or something. So I really wanted this to be heavy on the mountains and then blend all the way into the shot, so it's completely seamless, and also so it starts getting like the glows off the lights and stuff. But for the actual material of this, I trialed a few things. So I trialed like the different colors and like levels of brightness because I wanted it to be seamless where it met the mountain, which you can see it does. And then I changed the anisotropy. Now changing this is basically just rotating where the light is like bouncing to. So anisotropy to the right would be more like backwards facing, and then minus would be more like front facing light bounce, which means, yeah, it's just try it because I don't know the exact specifics, but it is basically rotating where the light is sort of bouncing. But yeah, to do the gradient, I essentially just got a gradient texture, which was, if I turn this all the way up, just control the density, and then I plug that into the density. Now this shader here is basically because I was having like a hard time rendering out fog separately, and a lot of people probably have this problem, because there is a bug where if fog is touching an object, you might not be able to render it out separately. But basically what this does is make it transparent but still cast a shadow. So here you can see I have no fog, but it's still casting a shadow. If I turn it off completely or just hide the object, you'll see that shadow disappear. And the reason for that is because if I'm rendering fog separately so that I could do like a different noise level so it rendered quicker, I could then composite it on top and it's still the same. But I was having issues with like these edges, having black edges around it. So I just used the hold out method, which you just click hold out and it works. Sometimes though this doesn't work, because I could have swore it wasn't working and then I clicked it and then it started working again. So yeah, this doesn't even like it's working how it should be working, because yeah, I think I just found the error again. Because if this shader is on and I do normal, that's what it should look like. But with holdout selected, it doesn't look like that. Which is weird because this should only be casting shadows. So maybe if I do have it not in the ground, yeah. You see what I mean? If it's touching an object, it won't cast shadows. Super weird. I was speaking to someone who does use like Maya and stuff, and they don't have this problem with like VDBs and volumes not casting shadows. So I do think this is an error, but I ended up just trying to work around it as best as could. Now, I also added in this fog close, and this is just a little bit of glow too. Well, a little bit of fog just to get that nice headlight glow from the spinner. So if I turn my spinner on, you'll see that I'm getting lovely sort of cinematic, if you will, lighting coming from the fog, which is always good, but you just need a lot of samples to get that looking good, which is a shame. But that again is why I wanted to render the fog out separately, because I wanted to render everything else at one sort of noise level. So I think I did like 3000 for everything, and then I only did 1000 for the volumes, and then denoised everything. But I didn't denoise the base images, only the volumes, and that was purely so that I could save on render time. Now, something that I nearly completely forgot to mention is that my sky is actual clouds. And this is something I've been doing a lot recently, is not skimping out on things like this. Now, in the past I've used HDRIs, and sure, that can work. But when you're doing animations, there's so much that needs to go on and happen for it to look real. And one of that is that clouds move across the sky, right? So what I did was I used Geoscatter again, and Geoscatter actually has a really good biome that you can buy. So from there you can like add in a plane, and you can go biome scatter and open biomes, and then the biomes that you've purchased will actually be here, and you essentially can just click one, and you'll have to scale up this plane quite a lot for it to actually show like that, and just make sure that you apply your scale as well, otherwise it won't show. And then from there you'll get nice cloud layers that you can use in your render. And then to animate it, it's actually in my hidden folder. You can then animate the plane that it sat on so that it looks like the clouds are actually like moving slowly, basically to give you like some sort of parallax. So here we have my cloud layer. So from here we could actually start like moving these, and it just adds so much more realism. Sure, you can get moving HDRIs, but having something that will affect your lighting, that will add shadows to your scene, will add so much to your scene. If you do have a low res, like a low quality computer, maybe don't do this. But when you do get up to the stage where you don't have to worry about render times, I think doing stuff like this is really handy. And then if I go into rendered view, right, and I'll just hide my hidden objects again, you can see they do look pretty bad. But once I add my fog in, the whole scene just like comes together and looks really badass. Now, if people are wondering what I'm doing to light the world, it's literally, if I just grab this plane or grab the smoke, it's literally this HDRI that I'm using, and I've plugged that into a mix just to add a little bit of green into it, and then it becomes my background. So it's not complex at all. Alright, so now the only things I need to show you are the smoke and the rain. So starting off with the rain sim, you'll see here I have Barga Rain Generator, and I actually only ended up using the splashes from this. So let me just turn off, I think it's turned on, yeah, the objects that it's affecting. But I actually only ended up using these splashes here. Now the reason for this is because the actual rain looks a bit weird, and it's so like long, and it doesn't have wind, it's only like a direction. So what I did was, so if you don't know what Barga Rain Generator is, I can show you actually. I'll just delete this one and I'll do it again. So the way this works is you get an object which you want to put rain onto, you go to Barga Rain, and then you essentially hit add rain. And then from there it will add droplets and it will add splashes, right? And it's all just quite simple, to be honest. It's just like this. but the way that it looks in render isn't really that good. So what I did was I found the droplet material that I actually used. So if you go down to the material of the actual rain, you'll see it's using splashes, and you need to actually select one for droplets. So what I did was I made a droplet material, so droplet 2, but then I just turned off the alpha and made it black, and that meant that we couldn't actually see the droplets like so, but we could still get the splashes, right? And what I did was I basically selected a holdout of everything but the rain. So that allowed me to only render out the rain essentially. So let me just put this into a group. So let's call this floor just for the sake of this. So now that it's targeting this, I can then do a holdout. And what this means is that to camera, this plane doesn't exist. It's only rendering out these particles, right? But then I can render out that floor plane once again, and then put the rain on top using the alpha that is created by using a holdout. And that's the whole of what compositing is. If you render out a certain thing and you use holdout, it's like created an alpha which you can use to paste stuff on top of each other. It's really useful. I'll go through it when we go through it in Nuke. But this meant I could control how bright everything was and the color of everything, and it basically just allowed me to finesse how the rain looked for every part of the image. Now, for the actual rain, I made it myself, just using a particle system. I think I actually used like 400,000 particles to get the rain that I wanted. So to do that, I added in a plane. I scaled it up. This will probably crash if I'm not careful, so I need to make sure that it doesn't. I go to particle settings, and then I have it as an emitter, right? And then I increase the number first, so maybe let's do like 3,000. And then from there, I then started using wind modifiers. So I Shift A, added wind, and I like to scale it up so that I can see it. And then once you have this in, let me just scale that down and turn off auto key like so. And then once this is happening, you can then start to increase the power of your wind, and then you'll start to get actual wind coming from your rain, which is very cool. And then I did the exact same as what I did on my cloth. I literally just rotated it slowly so that it was like the wind was actually having an effect on the rain, which is exactly what I wanted. And then I just changed it, rendered it out separately, and then changed like the brightness, the color. I gave it a little bit of blur too, just so it didn't look like too sharp. But yeah, that was pretty much it for the rain. The last thing we're going to show off in this scene is the smoke sim. So this was done in Embergen, which I will go into. I will show you it. Let me just delete everything out the scene. So yeah, this is the simulation. It was like a really high quality simulation. It might even crash my scene if I try to play it. But yeah, there you go. If I just go through it, you can see how it's sort of like a helicopter landing is sort of what I was trying to get. But obviously with wet dirt, you wouldn't get a lot of kick up. That's why it isn't like going into the sky crazy. I just wanted like a subtle sort of vortexy dirt effect. And then if I go up to the top too, you can see it a little bit better. So this is from top view. You can sort of see what's happening. So it's quite simple, but I think it added a lot to the shot and made it dynamic. Again, the more moving elements you can have in a shot, the better normally the shot will turn out, because it just feels alive. But yeah, this really struggled to render because Blender just hates volumes. But I love volumes, which is kind of sad to me that I use Blender so much. But one thing that I did, and not many people know this, but if you go into the render settings, right, there's a volume section. And by default, this is set at like 1,000, right? Which, I mean, instantly you see my viewport just slows down dramatically. Now, this is basically like the equivalent of samples for your render. So the higher it's going to be, the slower it's going to be. But if you lower this to like 10, it looks the exact same, but the speed is drastically different. So if I go back up to 1,000 and then I try to move around, it's not even usable. So I'm really not sure why Blender uses this as the default, but my recommendation for anybody watching this is to set your volumes to 10 and then set your step rate at 0.01 and set that as your default file. So if you go to File, Default, Save Startup File with this volume thing and done, your scene will perform so much better. And then if you do have like a volume which you're rendering, which you need high quality, just do what I've done here and say what step rate you're going to use, just so you're reminded that you need to increase your volume step rate for the final thing. Because sure, you can use a slow volume thing for the actual render, but in your viewport, you don't want to be like held back just because of a setting you don't even know is here. So I don't know, maybe we need to start a petition to make Blender change the default volume setting. I don't know, but yeah, that's one way to fix it. All right, so for this smoke sim, I actually used a preset pretty much for the whole of it. Well, I'll actually show you the preset. So I'm going to go to home and I'm going to go to presets, and it's similar to, which one was it? Yeah, this one. So it's essentially this, but instead of one explosion, it's just constantly exploding. So I'm going to go home and then go to my home projects. This one. So this is sort of what it looks like in Embergen. So pretty much identical to how it looks in my file. And you can see here are my models I brought in. So pretty cool. Now the reason obviously the car is missing is just because I didn't export it. And the reason it's going so slow is because Embergen operates in 60 FPS, whereas my file is actually 30 FPS. So the whole thing moves a little bit slower, which sometimes makes it a little bit tricky to understand how quick things are moving. But I guess that's just like the aim of the game for when you're doing stuff in Embergen. Embergen is very like intended for like game use. That's the only drawback really. But everything else is pretty good. So here's what I've got. I've got my my environment here in an import node, and I've got that as a collider, right? This is just my camera, so we don't really need to look at that. So if you haven't used Embergen before, it's essentially you've got an emitter, you've got a simulation where you can change some of the parameters of like the smoke itself. Then you've got something that processes it into something that you can export, and then you can export it. You can also render it in Embergen and then just comp it in post. I've never actually done that yet, so I don't know how it works. But what I like to do is actually export a VDB and then import that into Blender. Now, the way I've gone about this for this shot is I've got my cylinder and it basically moves wherever this wheel moves. So if I go to top view, you can see it pretty much just follows this wheel, right? Because obviously if the car's moving, the thruster's moving. Now to get this actual shape, obviously I used the preset, but I just changed some of these emissions, right? And like these parameters to get this effect. I could change stuff so that it looked a bit different. You can really just play with how it looks. There's also like a force on this, which is pulling the smoke inwards, because as a helicopter lands, it normally like creates a vortex, and this force here is basically affecting this simulation, right? And then this noise is also doing that, but this noise is essentially making the simulation a little bit more detailed. This is sort of what noise does. So when I let it get a little bit more crazy, so right now it looks kind of flat, but as soon as I increase the noise, you can see it starts getting a little bit more interesting. So now it's a bit flat again, and then noise, instantly a little bit more detail, which is pretty cool. Now, I'm definitely not on the expertise to show you exactly every parameter and the reasons why, but I will be giving this Embergen file in my Discord. So the Discord link will be in the description. And by the time I've uploaded this, if I haven't already uploaded it on Discord, then just put a message in like the general chat and I will put the link there. But this will be available for anybody to use. It won't have the geometry in it. It will literally just be this. So then you can export it into your files if you want, and you know, you can use it. But yeah, this will be on the Discord completely for free. Now for rendering, I used a render farm called GarageFarm. GarageFarm are sort of like an all-in-one platform for rendering. They cover everything from Blender, 3ds Max, Maya. They cover all the render engines, so Cycles, Redshift, Corona, V-Ray, all of the ones that you could possibly want. They offer a $50 starter like sort of pack so that you can test your renders, and they also offer a perpetual discount for Blender users with 33% off your rendering. So there is a link in the description that you can use to get started on rendering on GarageFarm, but I'm also going to show you how you can get started as well. So I'm just on their website right now, and this is GarageFarm. And you can see you get $50 free credits and you get 33% off Blender rendering. And you can also see all the stats here. They have 25,000 CPU cores, 500 GPUs, 24/7 service. And I must say their customer service is something like next level. I was like testing some renders because they actually allow you to submit a render, right? But it would only render like every 10 frame, which means you can get sort of a rough idea how long your render is going to take. And I was just getting started and I was asking them how to do it like properly. And they replied in like 5 minutes and gave me all the know-how that I needed to know. So here we are in my account, and you see I've cleared my page of all my renders. But to get started, you'll first need to go to downloads, and you'll need to download the right sort of software that you're going to be using. And then you're going to install it. And that's going to give you a software called RenderBeamer. So now we're in RenderBeamer, right? And this is basically where you install the software so that you can use it in Blender. So in the top left here, you'll see Blender. And I'm going to go over to the right and click install. And because it's going to automatically install a plugin for you to use, it's really helpful if you close down Blender. So I'm just going to close down Blender right now and then hit retry. And now it's going to start working. All right, so now that's installed, I can simply just render it. So first you might need to check if you've actually got the render installed. So you'll have to go to File, Preferences, Add-ons, and go to your RenderBeamer and just make sure that it's ticked on. It might be in an extension, so just be wary of that. And then all you're going to do is just make sure the settings that you have are the ones that you want. You're going to go up to the top left and then click RenderBeamer. And I'm going to be rendering an animation, so I'm going to click Render Animation, and then it's going to give you a warning. I'm going to hit OK and hit OK again. Now what this is going to do is it's going to upload your Blender file to RenderBeamer. And if it's taken a while, this is just because it's starting to pack everything in your Blender file. All right, so now it's uploaded. Essentially, you'll see we now have a folder. So if we click in this folder and click in it once again, we'll see our Blender scene, and this window pops up, right? And this is where we can kind of change all our render settings if we decide we want to change something but the file is already uploaded. And this is a really cool sort of system that's implemented. You can even change your file output, which is pretty cool. So what this is going to do right now is actually going to test the job. Now you can do full job or you can do test job, and test job is going to render every sort of frame. So this is only going to render 14 frames out of 300. This is actually going to calculate the cost that the entire job will take when you do eventually render the whole thing. Now you could do a full job straight away, but do it lower quality just so you can check if everything's running right. But yeah, to do a test job, this is what you do. You just click test and you just make sure that you are getting the right frame range. You can put it on high priority, medium, or low priority. And then you can also change sort of what preferred hardware you're going to use. So that is pretty much GarageFarm. So now all that is left to talk about is how I composited this all together and how I ended up color grading it. So let's dive into it. All right, so now we're in Nuke. You see this is Nuke. This is the script, and don't be scared of the script. This really isn't a lot. It's just a lot of like the same stuff essentially. So to start off with, let's start with the base, right? So I had one render. I said I rendered in multiple different renders just to keep the VRAM low and to change stuff if I wanted to change stuff. So this is the first render. I had a second render of all the rocks, and then I composite them together. Now the way I did this is just setting the operation to over, and this basically means wherever the alpha is, it's gonna try composite over, which is super helpful. From there, I did like a little bit of a grade on it just to darken it. I thought it was a little bit dark. And then I added in my fog layer, which looked like this. And then again, just using that alpha just to composite it over. And then I added in some splashes, which you can't really see. It's more these ones over here, I think. Yeah. And then I did a little bit of a blur. Now, all these green nodes is basically me just like masking off where I want stuff to appear or where I don't want stuff to appear. Obviously, I could do like a crypto map, but I just ended up rotoing a lot of the stuff. From there, I added in my smoke layer. Again, just doing an over thing. And then I also tried to match the color with the scene a little bit better. It was a bit too orange. So I desaturated it and made it a little bit darker just so it fit in the scene a little bit better. And then this is where I started adding in my rain. And again, this looks crazy, but it's really not. So this is my rain, and I essentially just graded it a lot with loads of different roto masks. And then I also did a mask for the actual over. So if I unplug this, you'll start to see I get a bit more like rain everywhere, but you'll see it like it starts to go over the smoke and stuff like that. So I wanted to have more control of where the rain was hitting. So essentially I created a mask. So I used the actual RGB of the smoke, and then I also rotoed my own mask so that I could then blend where the rain was happening. So essentially the smoke is creating a mask of where this rain can appear, which basically allows the smoke to be over the rain, but also like under it, if you get me. And then I also added in the rain again, but on like a smaller level, just so I had a little bit more control over it. Then I did a write node, and basically this is rendering everything that I've done so far into then one single clip, right? And this just makes it a little bit more efficient. Your scripts can get quite heavy, especially in like 4K. And if you're using multiple 4K elements, it can get quite heavy. So I just like doing a write node, and then it makes everything a bit nicer. From here, I started adding in some glows. So you'll see here a little glow. And then I also softened the image slightly, because 3D just is always a bit too sharp. I did a grade node, again, just to make it a little bit brighter. I added in some sort of lens effects, which is like, it's just these lens PNGs I got from, I can't actually remember where I got them from. If you just search like VFX lens dirt, it will probably come up. And then I multiplied the base image, which is blurred, over my initial like 2 images, and then I plus that on top, and then that just gives me like some sort of lens dirt. From there, I added in some like smoke effects, which you can see kind of. And then I did a chromatic aberration, which is just like your lens losing sharpness at the edges, like so. And then I did a write node again. Now from here, I added in some like 2D elements. So like this smoke element, I added in this dust element. I'm not sure why it's not moving right now, but it should be moving. some more dust, and then this is my rain pass that I did. Here you can actually see the rain moving, and what I did was just merge it over using the alpha that was already in there once again, and then I did a right node. Now for the final thing, I did actually want to do like raindrops on the lens, and I did do them, but it just looked a bit too distracting, so I basically went off it and just gave up the idea. So my final layer is just like an auto lens flare, which gives you like cool lens flares like this. And then I also added in some like distortion, where like this engine heat will be coming up and distorting the air behind it. And that is pretty much it. I mean, this is my my clay render, if people are interested. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, it looks scary, but it's really not. It's just adding all my elements together, grading them so that they all fit right, adding in some 2D elements, just using the plus. It's basically like a screen on top. It's just footage. And then adding in an auto flare. Pretty simple. So now we need to jump into DaVinci Resolve and show you how I color graded it. All right, so now we are in DaVinci Resolve, and you can see my color grade is not crazy whatsoever. This is the final shot ungraded, and I'll start turning these on one by one. So this one is just to sort of get the base going, add in the sort of color that I want, add in the contrast that I want, just getting that sort of feel. This one, I'm not even sure what this does. Doesn't actually look like this is doing anything. This one is an aperture diffraction, so that is just giving us a little bit more starburst on our glows. We've got halation, and this is just something that happens on film cameras. You get like nice glows around your highlights. And then I did another glow, did a little vignette, and then I did a film grain. Film grain always helps sell the realism of your footage. And I normally like doing a custom one, so I normally set the size myself and then I sort of play with it just so I get it looking right. But yeah, that is pretty much my shot. I mean, if you're wondering how I grade this, I literally just grab these knobs and just tweak. I just drag it, and if I think I like it, I like it. I mean, this could have been kind of cool, like kind of a desaturated look, but I went for that sort of blue look, which I think looks pretty cool. So yeah, very simple. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. I know it was just very chatty, just talking along, but hopefully you learned something, I guess, and how you can improve your renders by sort of not skipping where you can add detail. And hopefully you're going to use the Garage Farm. Again, there's a link in the description if you want to use it.